get started here. Thank you all for coming. My name is Gabriel Garcia. I am a student here at the University of New Mexico. I'm actually a first-year pharmacy student. So if you ever wonder what it's like to be a pharmacy student, just kind of imagine that you're dying always. But it's a really enjoyable death because everything you're learning is really interesting and intriguing. But you're still dying nonetheless, and so that's how I kind of feel most of the time. Anyways, I'm honored to be in front of you all tonight. When I was asked to give this seminar, I was a little confused because, I'm married, but it doesn't really mean I'm good at marriage. Again, marriage feels like you're dying, but it's also it's a good kind of dying. You should be dying because you're dying to yourself. And but it is also the most rewarding thing in my life, and if I had to go back over and get married to my wife again, I would do it in a heartbeat, because there really is nothing more valuable in my life than my marriage right now. So I love it. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and be talking to you tonight about the defense of natural marriage. So, again, I'm not infallible, so hopefully I'm not preaching heresy to you tonight.
You got two priests.
I've got two priests to back me up, or excommunicate me, I don't know. But, just kidding, guys. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. First, I'd like to play a little game with you guys to try and whet your appetite and get you guys excited about this. It's called, Who's Really Married? And there's different contestants, and you got to think about, are these guys really married? I don't know. You guys have to decide. Alright, our first contestants, Saints Mary and Joseph. Born almost 2,000 years ago, these two pious Jews raised God in the flesh. They are called the Holy Family and are example to married couples everywhere. Although their love was pure and the kind that you would expect from saints, they never actually had marital intercourse with each other. Are they really married? Contestants number 2. Daniel and Andrew Kostastis. On Saturday, June 8th, 2013, Andrew and Daniel dared to break the canons of a church that would declare the love between these two men false and their marriage impossible. Yes, these two men were married according to the Byzantine tradition of the Greek Orthodox rite. They dared to be who God made them to be and receive the divine blessing, since the service was under the mantle of God's love, where the church is truly found. Are these men really married to each other? Contestants number 3, Amy and Brad. Amy is a strong, independent, modern woman working for the airline company. Even with these strong modern traits, the princess inside of her wanted a fairy tale wedding. She finally convinced her boyfriend of 5 years, Brad, to tie the knot with her and assured him that they weren't going to have any kids to take away from their high-speed, adventurous lifestyle. Are they really married? Our last contestants. Our last contestants are Cody and Mary, and Chanel, and Christine and Robin. You may better know them for their shows on TV. All of these people love each other. You cannot deny the passion that they share, or the outpouring of care and sacrifice that they give to one another. Their love has brought forth many children into this world, but their relationship is strained due to the lack of legal recognition of their relationship. Are they really married? Or any of these people really married? Well, to answer that, we first need to take a look at what marriage is, what it's not, and where the authority to define marriage actually comes from. So I'm going to split this talk up into 2 parts. The first part is going to focus on what natural marriage is and is not. And I'll talk about the problems of how our society tries to redefine marriage. Then I'm going to make a jump. And I'm going to talk about what marriage is meant to be, how American Catholics have contributed to the weakening of marriage. And so these are all to bring up a lot of ideas for you guys. I'm not going to answer everything, but I hope to give you the tools and prick your guys' brains and get you guys to start thinking. So I'd like to start out talking about natural marriages. This lecture will be geared to trying to defend natural marriage without mentioning the church for the first part of my talk. The way I plan on doing this is through natural law and showing the problematic solutions that come when you try to redefine marriage. So, let's go ahead and talk about natural marriage then. But first, I want to say a word about natural law. Natural law is different from the laws of nature. In English, sometimes we get these terms confused because they sound similar, but they're not the same thing. The laws of nature are the order which governs the activity of the material universe. For example, the 4 fundamental forces are laws of nature. Any science geeks in here? Science majors? Can anyone tell me what the 4 fundamental forces are?
Gravity, strong, weak, and
Electromagnetic. Yeah, you like your cell phones and radios, right? So you gotta like those guys.
Earth, wind, and fire.
All right. So those are the laws of nature. Natural law, as St. Thomas Aquinas says, is, quote, nothing else than the rational creature's participation in the eternal law, unquote, which is God's wisdom. The natural law is universal and applies to the entire human race. It points us to the fulfillment of our design. Yes, it is philosophical, and unfortunately I'm not a philosopher. I wish I had more training in philosophy, but I don't. It's limited, but I'm going to work with what I have. As St. John Paul says, truth cannot contradict truth. There are truths in the laws of nature that point us to natural law, but not all the laws of nature or what we observe in nature is natural law. Let me give you an example. The laws of nature dictate that we eat and sleep. These are good things. They are not of themselves immoral in any way. Natural law doesn't have a problem with that. However, we have the ability to overeat and oversleep. This is an abuse, and we cannot come to the conclusion that since we can overeat, nature has provided, and there are limited benefits to overeating, it can keep you psychologically happy. Natural law says that this is not a good thing, and you are actually endangering yourselves, and you may be prone to gluttony. Let's take a moral example of how someone could use the observations in nature and twist their meanings to sanction their moral actions and feelings. So let's go ahead and take a look at Bob. Bob likes women. Bob wants to have sex with a lot of women. So Bob turns to nature to decide if what he desires is moral or not. Bob can't help but notice that the promiscuity of certain apes is directly correlated with the size of their testes. Bob looks at bonobos and says, well, bonobos have fairly large testes, and they go around and they have lots and lots of partners, and they have male on male and female on female and male to female. They just have lots of sex all the time. And when you compare that to gorillas, well, they have very small testes, and they don't have sex nearly as often. So based on my own measurements, I have come to the irrefutable conclusion that nature has designed me to have lots and lots of sex with any women that I want. Any women that I want. So, really, Bob? Really? You're gonna look to nature like that and, justify your own morality that way? Natural selection might take its course and remove you from the gene pool. Just kidding. Bob should get baptized or go to confession and become a saint, like all of us. But yes, this is how some people think. I know it's kind of silly, but people will turn to nature, look at these things and say, well, it's only natural, that must mean I must have to do it. They see sex as a natural right. They'll say, well, I was born this way. Or they'll say, well, nature just didn't intend for me to be monogamous. I must have multiple partners or my passions will never be satisfied. And I deserve to be happy. That's how nature intended me to be. Or they'll also say, well, partner just isn't doing it for me anymore, and my passions come first before all else. Okay, well, I was born, and sometimes I feel like punching you in the face, but I resist. Because that would be wrong, and it's hurting someone. And just because I can do it doesn't mean I should. So, just because something occurs in nature does not mean that it is natural law. Things in nature can point us to natural law, but we still need to use our reason and our intellect to arrive at the appropriate conclusion. So what is marriage? I'd like to go ahead and introduce the concept of natural marriage. And hopefully by now you're not trying to find an example of marriage that occurs in nature. But there are observations that can point us in that direction. So squirrels don't marry each other, and Lobo Louie and Lucy, by the nature of their animal status, no matter how anthropomorphic they may be, they cannot get married. I'm not even sure they actually really exist, since they're more of a concept. Anyways, natural marriage is, quite simply, the union of one man and one woman together by God's will in a covenantal relationship and conjugal friendship, with the ability to bring forth the creation of new souls in what we know as children. This is accomplished when a man and woman come together and they exchange vows and they create a covenant with one another. And this is pretty unique in the sense that the administrators of this covenant are the bride and the groom in this. Again, this is only talking about natural marriages right now. But why this definition? And under what authority do you give it? Some people may say, you closed-minded, conservative, anti-all rights bigots, why are you against gay marriage? Well, it's not that I'm against gay marriage per se, but that gay marriage is an ontological impossibility. It's like asking, why am I against square circles? Or why does sound travel at the speed of light? You're asking the wrong questions. Marriage has an essence, and it has a meaning. Through nature, we can observe that creating children requires one man and one woman. And children need to be reared, or the human race will become extinguished. Even if it's for a limited time, at least the father and the mother need to raise a child. It took two to bring a child into existence. It's not a far-fetched to say that they are responsible to raise them. Besides, there is a strong bond created within the child for their biological parents. Even if they never get the opportunity to meet their parent, there is still something embedded within them that wants to meet their parents. The study of cultural anthropology reveals that practically all people, although yes, there are exceptions, have attached an inherently sacred and religious character to marriage, which they express by special symbolic rites of a public and solemn kind. These rites become part of their traditions, their customs, and their laws, which all recognize that marriage is not of human origins, but must be of something higher. They always appeal to something above them, because they realize the universality of this. So there is a way to arrive at the meaning, the marriage definition from natural law. However, in our culture, the precise form of marriage, which is commanded by natural law, is not immediately apparent to everyone. People aren't always reasonable, and that goes for many Catholics as well. They can be blinded or even hypocritical, or even emotions might get in the way. Also, reason applied to natural law has its limitations in making known the complete will of the author of nature to humanity. So, let's go ahead and take a moment to see the problems associated with alternative definitions of marriage. So, let's go ahead and look at the secular / humanist / the current social definition of marriage. It goes along the lines of something like this. The union between two persons, usually sexual, passionate, and involves lots of love, who enjoy each other's love, company, and also enjoy certain legal benefits and protection from the law, under the law from discrimination. Most people in our society believe that underlying marriage is love and passion, a force that binds two people of either sex or of the same sex. Love doesn't discriminate. That's what I would say our culture kind of leans towards in defining marriage right now. The problem I have with this definition is this. This definition leads to its own annihilation. There are also inherent contradictions in our culture's current definition of marriage. So again, I want to say that one more time. The way that they try to define marriage essentially annihilates itself and becomes nothing. I'll explain in a second. Like I said, there's also contradictions, and here's an example of it. They'll say love has no bounds. Well, our society has already deemed it unacceptable and currently discriminates against those who would advocate for marriage to exist between family members. It is currently illegal for me to marry one of my sisters or my mother. It is also hypocritical for those same people in our society, in the name of non-discriminatory marriage, to look upon marriages between multiple people. Think back to Cody and Mary, Janelle, Christine, and Robin. They all love each other very much, but our laws and society prohibit them from full legal status and entitlements simply because they express their love among multiple people. As far as our culture's definition of love, no bounds marriage, marriage equality, they still have a long ways to go, so I'm not sure why they're celebrating so much quite yet. Although in Germany, I think it was in 2013, the National Ethics Council has taken a vote and is suggesting that it should be legal for brothers and sisters to marry, since there was a man who was imprisoned for living with his sister and had kids with her. he's claiming that he's being discriminated against, and he should love whoever he wants. And so there's movements over there already. And according to those same definitions, why shouldn't incest or a polygamous marriages be legal? These inconsistencies directly contradict our culture's current definition of marriage. If incest grosses you out, maybe you just need to have an open mind and realize that love takes many forms. Who are you to judge them? And why can't 3, 5, 12, or 50 people become married? You're trying to set a bound on someone's love? They may live together or live around the nation or even around the world. Like I said, who are you to restrict their love? Who are you to judge and discriminate? Again, this is coming from our society's definition of marriage taken to its logical conclusion. In New Zealand, I think it was last year, there was a bro competition where 2 friends would get together and, there's bro love, and this competition was to see how far 2 bros would go together in order to win the prize. The prize was a trip to the 2015 Rugby World Cup over in England. Anyways, there was a bro couple that got to the very end. They're both heterosexual men. But for the last thing they had to do, the last obstacle they had to overcome was marry each other. And in New Zealand, they can marry. Homosexual persons are permitted to marry under their law. So these 2 men got married for the competition, won, and I'm sure, I don't know if the Rugby World Cup took place already, but they had the time of their lives. Many of the gay activists were very upset about this. They claimed, you're making fun of everything that we worked so hard to describe, and you're belittling what we view to be marriage. And I really can't help but think that they're being hypocritical to themselves. It's okay for 2 gay men to get married, but it's not okay for 2 straight men to get married. Like, if you're all about marriage equality, you need to be consistent. So rather than moaning about the competition, I think they should follow their own logic and beliefs and celebrate the equality and equity of marriage. If marriage is just about passion, convenience, and happiness, it essentially becomes nothing. There's no substance to that. 50 people in a marriage is hardly distinguishable from an orgy. If that passion disappears, who cares if 2 people were only married for a week, or for a day, or for a month? Marriage then becomes little more than a legal status which provides the benefits and really has no definition. And even then, the states are going to lose incentives to advocate marriage if people are just so willy-nilly about it. It's not going to alter any benefit to them. And that's my point. Our culture's definition of marriage essentially annihilates any concept or standard of marriage, and it becomes nothing. And the logical conclusion of how our culture defines marriage leads to that. Does this redefinition, this all-new, all-inclusive meaning give freedom to what it means to be married? Has the nature or essence of marriage, whatever it may be, we haven't addressed it quite yet, lost or gained any of its virtue? Well, let's think about it like this. What are you sitting in?
Chair.
Chair. What makes a chair a chair?
I can sit in it.
You can sit in it. Is the nature of its chairness? Is it participating in some form of what it means to be a chair? Well, whatever it is, it's very useful, right?
Yes.
So what if we extend that definition to include only things that are of organic substances can be a chair? Okay, you can still work with that. I mean, there's a lot of wood chairs, right? And maybe you could use a tree stump as a chair. So what if we go even farther? And what if our new definition is now all-inclusive and anything can be a chair? Your knife can be a chair. A single atom can be a chair. The lawn outside can be a chair. The roof can be a chair. Has the nature of what it means to be a chair lost its virtue? Or has this all-new, all-inclusive definition given freedom to what it means to be a chair? Or does it kind of annihilate what it means to be a chair? Now, chairs and marriages are very different. They're not the same thing. I'm just giving you a silly example. But still, we may not know exactly what marriage is and what makes up a marriage, but we do know that there has to be some sort of definition and boundaries that accurately reflects the essence of what something is. So the question is naturally asked, who has the authority to define marriage? Does the government have authority to define marriage? Before the SCOTUS ruling, the gay community was very vocal about the law being unjust and discriminatory. After the ruling, and when people broke the law, like Kim Davis for not issuing same-sex marriage license, or not issuing marriage license to same-sex couples, the gay community quickly got on her back, saying how she broke the law. It's immoral to break the law. You need to follow the law. You can't just break the law. It's immoral to break the law. Well, I think we can all agree, and including the gay community, that there is such a thing as an unjust law. For them, they saw the law before the ruling to be unjust. With changing laws, how sure can you be that the law will always reflect what is true? Bill Clinton signed into law the Defense of Marriage Act back in the 90s. This was supposed to protect traditional marriage. Is the law going to define marriage as it does now in another 20 years? Is it going to be more inclusive? Is it going to be more restrictive? Is it going to exist at all? I don't know. It's not a constant. At times, it may reflect reality, and at other times, maybe not so much. However, truth is constant, not contradictive, and not changing. I would argue that the state has a duty to protect marriage. Healthy marriages have many benefits to the state. They raise productive citizens who keep society going. Unstable households require the state to step in, utilizing time, energy, and resources to keep the peace and protect other citizens. I've often heard gay activists say that marriage is a civil matter. They'll say, well, if you want a church wedding, then go ahead to a church and have a church wedding. However, marriage is a matter of civil law. And since it is unconstitutional to deny equal civil rights to citizens, it is unconstitutional to deny homosexual couples, or really any combination of persons, the right to marry. Insisting that the question of marriage is a matter of civil law and not first of all a religious matter does not take us really far. You can't go up to someone and say, you can't get married because the church says so. You're just going to bring up a bunch of defenses and you're not going to get very far with that person. So let's take a look at what a civil right is. To argue, as the gay activists do, that the Constitution guarantees equal treatment to all citizens, both men and women, this does not say anything about what constitutes a marriage, or a family, or a business enterprise, or a university, or a friendship, or a natural law. The law changes and is not constant. And we know that there is such a thing as an unjust law. The law does not dictate what is moral or what is right. They control, hopefully, to enforce those realities. So civil right of equal treatment cannot constitute a reality by declaration. I'll give you another silly example. Congress or the Supreme Court cannot get up and say, no one is to be subjected to gravity anymore. This is a silly example, but my point is, the law cannot alter the reality or nature of what something is, or what makes something moral. They can say something, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. With regards to the gravity laws, they can't define what gravity is, or they can't alter what gravity is, but they can protect its citizens from gravity. They can design laws that keep people safe. They can require certain regulations that go into the infrastructure of buildings so they don't topple over on people, but they can't go against the nature of what gravity is. The reality is that gravity is a real force and all people are subjected to it, whether you like it or not. Civil rights protections function to assure every citizen has equal treatment under the law. It's not saying what is right, but they're assuring that every citizen is treated equally under the law. So let's say you contract with me to paint your house or something, and I really do paint, so if you need a house painted, let me know. I'll make a price for you. The law of contract does not define ahead of time what might be contracted. It simply clarifies the legal obligations of the contracting parties and the consequences if that contract is broken. If you were to pay me ahead of time and then I didn't come and pay your house, well, I am going to suffer the repercussions of that. And that's what the law is for. Governments and lawyers and the law do not create the people or the house or the paint or my desire to paint your house for a price that you are willing to pay. They don't create any of those things. They just regulate those. So my point is that the law plays limited roles in those relationships. If someone wants to argue that two people, or 12, who have not in the past been recognized as marriage partners should now be recognized as marriage partners, they need to first demonstrate that marriage law, or the nature of marriage, not civil law, has been overlooked or misidentified something that should not have been overlooked or misidentified. So the law can't say what is, but if the law is wrong about what something is, then it can re-examine it and determine, like, well, if this is what it really is, then we need to regulate it this way. If a gay man wants to become a pharmacist, he should be. The nature of being a pharmacist has nothing to do with your sexual orientation. Should a brown man have to sit at the back of a bus? No. There is nothing about the nature of bus seats or chairs that insists people of different skin color have to sit in a particular order. That is purely a social construct and was a law and was an unjust law, and it was wrong, because nothing about the nature of those objects dictate what should happen in those examples. This is just another example of some laws that did not reflect reality. So then, is marriage nothing more than just a social construct? Where does the law of marriage come from? The evidence suggests that while homosexuality has been around for thousands of years, the vast majority of marriages took some form from heterosexuals, even if it was polygamy, or if married men went and had sex with other men, they were still married to a woman, as was the case in ancient Greece. Many cultures believed that marriage originated from a higher source or a higher divinity, something other than themselves. Social constructs result from society's actions and something that they consider to be the norm. One very important aspect to marriage is that it involves a high level of morality in order to function. So let's go ahead and think about marriage in terms of morality and what is moral in a marriage. But first, we need to ask ourselves, what determines morality? Is it governments? Is it societies? Let me ask you this way. Is morality just a social construct? What must every good atheist say? He's got to say no. He has to admit that no, morality is not just a social construct or anything can go. And if that is the case, then how are you supposed to not approve of what you perceive to be someone else's mistreatment of their citizens? And I've heard many atheists say that I believe that morality is not a social construct, but that there's something innate within humans by observing cultures throughout history that dictates what is moral and what is not moral. So morality is not a product of society, but rather morality governs society. If morality was a social construct, then like I said, you cannot get on another culture's case about how you perceive how they're mistreating their own citizens. There is an absolute standard for morality. To say that there is not an absolute standard is contradictory because you're trying to absolutely say that there are no absolutes. And it's going to be really hard to follow your logic if you're completely contradicting yourself, and it's hard to take you seriously. I have a cool friend on Facebook who posted something about morality the other day. I thought it was really good, so I stole it from him without asking, and I'm going to go ahead and quote it now. Quote, "If morality is nothing other than a mere personal preference, then what reasons do you have to criticize someone else's views? Different strokes for different folks, right? Arguing with someone about morality is literally as stupid as arguing about which flavor ice cream is better. You have no right to tell someone else what they believe is wrong according to your view. You advocate tolerance of ideas, but you are intolerant of moral propositions that do not correspond to your own. Your premises lie wholeheartedly in the first place. You fail to practice what you preach, and in this way you are exactly the same thing that you despise." Boom. Mic drop. And thank you, Andre, and I hope you don't mind that I stole that from you. That was pretty good. Bottom line, there is a premise, Bottom line, there is a premise and a standard for morality. Now, the morality principle about gay marriage is not a popular one. People in general don't like to be told what they're doing is wrong. I'm not going to go into all the details about why homosexual activity is immoral. That would have to be another talk and can occupy a lot of time. I'm just saying that there is a morality principle that stems from the nature of marriage and what it means to be married. Marriage has a very high standard of morality, which the church will call chastity. That's something that we're all called to. So please don't interpret what I'm saying. I'm not saying that it's immoral to be gay, to have those feelings. to struggle with that. I have gay friends and I love them. They're wonderful people, and I find myself wondering why they can't enjoy marriage with a person of their choice. What I'm saying is that homosexual behavior is a disordered passion, and to act out on them is immoral. I myself have many disordered passions. They're very strong and they're very powerful, and I struggle with them, and I have to go to confession frequently because of them. I really do wish this concept was easy to explain. Like I said, on one hand, I really do sympathize with those people, and even though I don't agree with them, I do sometimes find myself wondering that what they do doesn't really affect my life, and they should be able to behave the way they want to. I wish I could behave according to my passions. But I have to remember that there is a reality to marriage. I haven't discussed what it is yet, but we know that there is a reality of marriage because everything else fails. And that I can't just change the definition or I risk obliterating what it means to have a marriage. Marriage can't just be a social construct, since its existence among all cultures throughout the ages points to some innate origin within people, like morality. And morality governs marriage. I can't go out and just have sex with anyone that I want to. This would damage my marriage. Governments do not have the authority to define what is marriage or what is reality for that matter, but they can only regulate how people act within a marriage. For example, husbands can't beat their wives, and even then, the way they regulate them is in a limited manner. Hopefully, those regulations can accurately reflect reality. I think that this is a great conversation starter with people who promote alternative definitions of marriage, because it demonstrates that there is something real about marriage, and you can't just change things, and there's something of substance there, and hopefully it gets them to think. And that's really a great starting point for people, is getting to think and engaging in a dialogue with them. So I've spent a lot of time talking about what marriage is and why some of the basic arguments for gay marriage leave a lot of unanswered questions. So now I'm going to go ahead and make the jump and talk about what marriage is, where it comes from, and what it looks like. And please realize that there is a gap that I'm leaving you guys, and it's up to you to build those bridges and connect those two ideas to find out, well, how do I explain to a person that marriage is not what you're saying it is, but here's what it actually is. Because there may be more than one way to do it, and there may be more than one answer, depending on who you're talking to. If you're talking to someone who's inclined towards believing in God or religion in general, you're going to take a different path. If you're talking to someone who's completely atheist or agnostics, you're going to have to take another path for that. I'm just trying to give you tools and trying to get you guys to think about that. So now, everything here on out assumes that there is a God who loves mankind. He founded his church for sinners so that we may be in communion with him, and he expects us to live according to his divine will. Natural marriages have been around for a millennium, although as testified in the Bible, it was grotesquely abused. Many of the patriarchs did not adhere to what should have been a natural marriage, and more often than not, it got them in a lot of trouble. Think about Jacob. He loved one wife more than the other, and it caused a lot of tension and heartbreak in his family. So, in that theologically rich book called Genesis, God institutes and defines marriage between one man and one woman through the creation of Adam and Eve. You guys know the story, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about it. But after everything was made and after everything was good, sin enters the world and really plagues marriage. Since then, since men kind of suck, God came down to restore marriage to its original state. Thus, Jesus elevated marriage to a sacrament. A sacramental marriage is God's gift to mankind. So in a sacramental marriage is going to be different than a natural marriage. A sacramental marriage is indissoluble. It cannot be broken. It is something that is permanent. Again, we had the valid marriages, we had natural marriages, and those are completely valid marriages. So for example, if a Jew marries another Jew and makes those vows in that covenant with them, that is a valid marriage. No one's arguing that. If a Christian and a Buddhist get married, they're not supposed to, it could still be a natural marriage. And so what's different about so some of the things that make a natural marriage, some of the things that make a sacramental marriage different than a natural marriage is this, that in a sacramental marriage, it must be between two baptized persons. It is indissoluble, it's permanent, and the stakes all around are raised much, much higher. And there's two ways to administer the sacrament. In the West, the couples are the bride and the groom, they're the administrators, and they make a vow with each other and a covenant with each other. And that is how the sacrament is administered, and it's pretty unique in that way. In the East, the sacrament is administered by the priest. He's the one who administers the sacrament of marriage to the couple through the rite of crowning. And if you guys have never seen a Byzantine wedding, I just think it's absolutely beautiful, and I think it's the best kind of wedding, personally, but I'm going to be a little biased. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And this is from the perspective of people. So the good, that's the sacramental marriage. Sacramental marriage is one, for the union of a man and woman together in a covenant and conjugal friendship. Two, it is for the procreation of children and their education. And three, it was given to us for our salvation. It is a means by which we can enter the kingdom of heaven. One of my primary goals is to make Ashley grow in holiness and get to heaven. One of her primary goals is to make me grow in holiness and get to heaven. So we both are going to be working as a team, and that's the purpose of marriage. So it's threefold. If you take any one of those aspects away, either the union between man and woman, the openness to life and children, or the fact that it's for salvation, you're going to have a crippling marriage, and it's not going to all be there. So why is marriage a reality? Well, it exists because Christ has a bride. Marriage and its nature are derived directly from Christ. Marriage is an icon of Christ and his bride, and it is a way for us to participate in God himself through his energies. And if that just doesn't blow your mind that we can participate in God's energies through marriage, I mean, that's part of fulfilling what we were actually designed for. So it's a lot easier to answer that to you guys because I'm preaching to the crowd a little bit, and it's a little easier and nicer in that way. All right. So in defending sacramental marriage, there are two things that I want to talk about that most Catholics in the U.S. are bad about. And these things are really destroying their marriages. So talking about sacramental marriage, that was the good. And again, this is from the perspective of people. So I'm going to talk about the bad. People think that this is the bad. And that is contraception. One of the big destroyers of marriages is the use of contraception. One, it actually prevents a sacramental marriage. If you enter into a church and you get married within the church but you're using contraception, you do not have a sacramental marriage. And although contraception has been around and used for thousands of years, the ancient Egyptians had this little powder called missy that they would use and they would inject. Can't remember what exactly it was made out of, but it had abortive effects, and it was an effective contraception in that way. So it's been in use for thousands of years, but they were only used by the pagans. God's people were not meant to be using contraception. Again, in that theologically rich book called Genesis, Onan was killed for spilling his seed and not impregnating his brother's wife. Okay, that sounds a little bit weird. His brother died, and he was supposed to carry on the line. And in the Jewish culture, if you did not fulfill your duty in carrying on your brother's lineage, you were humiliated, not killed. So the fact that Onan was killed is a really big indication that God is not happy with contraception. To be close to the prospect of children will radically alter the definition of marriage. The fact that our culture no longer sees the fact that children need to be from, or that marriage is for the purpose of children. Again, there's three purposes of marriage, and they're divorcing one of those. It's going to radically alter the definition of marriage, and which is why we have all these redefinitions today. So for a little over 1900 years, all Christians, Catholics, Orthodox, Protestants, believed that a couple must be open to the possibility of children, and contraceptive of any kind was a grave sin. But then in the 1930s, the Anglican Church, the ones who had altered marriage just 400 years earlier by allowing no-fault divorce of their king, again radically departed from the universal church, teaching that married couples are to be allowed contraception. The sexual act was divorced from the concept of bearing children. This isn't to say that every time you have sex you need to conceive a child. Don't put words in my mouth. It's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there is a natural and well-ordered unity between sex and the procreation of children that is not meant to be disrupted. Contraception did indeed change marriage. People can now have sex without that pesky consequence of pregnancy and responsibility. So why do you need to get married if you can now just have free sex? Sex will solve all of our problems. Contraception by nature has a selfish mentality to it. It says that I'm in control and I don't want children, I'm just making this about the orgasm. Well, guess what? Contraceptive was effective. It paved the way for the sexual revolution, and guess what? It didn't solve our problems. Now we have a whole slew of new problems. And sex became dangerous and was no longer safe. That's now when people are asking, well, are you having safe sex? Or you make sure you're having protected sex, don't have unprotected sex. Sex was never meant to be like that. Now I'm going to talk about the ugly, or how people perceive this to be the ugly. And that is the indissolubility of marriage, the permanence of marriage. A lot of people don't like that. A lot of people want to marry someone because they're passionately in love with them. That passion leaves and they no longer want to stick with them and they want to get out and relive those passions. In elevating marriage to a sacrament and now becoming what it's meant to be, sacramental marriages are indissoluble. Natural marriages may be dissoluble. So this is a difference between the two. And now I know that divorce is a very sensitive pastoral topic. It's a very complicated matter that results from many factors, including the poor education of laity and laymen, and people not taking marriage as seriously as it needs to be. But I'm not really going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about what Jesus said about the indissolubility of marriage. He makes the dissolubility of natural marriages clear when he talks about divorce in the Mosaic Law. But then in the Gospel of St. Matthew and St. Mark, in two different places, which means, this is probably really important, Jesus says that what God has joined together, let no man separate. The nature of a sacrament can't be reversed as well. Once you're in that sacrament, you can't really get out of it. And that's a good thing. You can't undo your baptism. When you go to confession sometime down the line, that repentance is no longer going to suddenly be unforgiven, and you're going to have to go back and reconfess that same sin. The sacraments are permanent and for us. People will often point to the exemption clause in Matthew and say, hey, Jesus said that we can get divorced if adultery is actually committed. Well, no, he didn't exactly say that. And we have to keep in mind that Jesus doesn't contradict himself, especially on important matters like this. In the Greek, the term that Jesus used was porneia. I'm probably butchering that Greek word a lot, but just bear with me, that's how I'm going to pronounce it for now. So porneia. So he says, what God has joined together, let no man take apart, except for the reason of porneia. And this word means sexual immorality in a general sense that has a long range of possible meanings. The three major schools of thought to how it can be used are these: adultery, sexual activity prior to the marriage and your betrothal, or marriage within a prohibited degree of kinship. Many Christians translate the porneia to mean adultery. And given the historical context, it could mean this, and you could make an argument for it. However, it does directly contradict what Jesus says, and it entails that the nature of a sacrament is not permanent. Relating porneia to sexual activity prior to marriage is known as the betrothal view. When Jews were betrothed, they were legally married, although they did not enjoy the benefits of marriage, like sex. So according to this view, divorce and remarriage are prohibited unless there has been infidelity prior to the wedding. This view is appealing because in the beginning of Matthew's Gospel, Joseph is described as a righteous man who nevertheless had decided to divorce Mary due to her betrothal, during their betrothal, since he suspected her of porneia. How would Joseph have been called righteous if he was about to do an action which would later be condemned by Jesus? So I still think there's a few holes in that definition as well. The third view is called the rabbinic view, and porneia is interpreted to mean general sexual activity within the prohibited degrees of kinship, as specified by Leviticus 18. So you can go ahead and get a divorce if you married your sister, you weren't stoned first, you could get a divorce from her, because the marriage never actually happened in the first place, because it couldn't by nature happen. In church history, there had been confusion about what Christ meant and what the apostles taught. This confusion really hit its high point during the Protestant Reformation, when the Protestant teacher said that marriage is not a sacrament anymore, and you should be able to marry who you want, whether you're a priest, whether you're a nun, or just a lay person, you're already in a marriage. During the Council of Trent, the church didn't reinvent marriage, but it did clarify a lot of things, mostly because there was mass confusion about it. So I feel, and so that was the good, the bad, and the ugly of that, again, from the perspective of a layman going to get married. I want to ask this question. Given what you guys know now, at the beginning of my talk, who was really married? How many people think Saints Mary and Joseph were really married? All right. How many of you guys think Daniel and Andrew Kostakis were really married? What about Amy and Brad? How about Cody, Mary, Chanel, Christine, and Robin? My point is this. Yes, Saints Mary and Joseph were really married. They were validly married. They did have a natural marriage. And it's kind of weird because people think, oh, like if you have sex, you must be married. It doesn't always have to be the case, but they did have a valid marriage. Daniel and Andrew, like again, it's like saying that, I'm not against gay marriage, but I'm just against their being square circles. It's an ontological impossibility. As far as Amy and Brad are concerned, I don't really know. I can't really say. They were definitely not open to the possibility of life. They are male and female. That one's a hard one. I can't really say. I'm not fit to say. As far as the that groupie, it's possible Cody may be married to one of those women before all the others hopped on board. I don't really know. I'm not really qualified to say. So, are there any questions that you guys have? I feel like I've been a little bit of a downer talking about all these things that marriage does not entail, but there are a lot of positive aspects and a lot of beautiful aspects to marriage. And if I had more time, I would love to go over those, but I'm running a little bit short, so I'm just gonna go ahead and go to questions.
Does marriage require consummation?
A sacramental indissoluble marriage does.
Okay.
You can have valid marriages, valid natural marriages that do not have a consummation, and you can have a sacramental, non-indissoluble sacramental marriage. And there are monks. There's a story that came out. There was a monk, and I can't remember what circumstances he was in, but he had to get married, and he didn't want to. But he went ahead and married the woman, and they remained virgins throughout the entire marriage, and that's known as a Josephine.
Josephite?
Yeah, the Josephite marriage. So, yeah.
And Josephite marriages are valid.
Yeah, they're valid.
They both have to agree and give their free consent
Right.
that they will live in a virginal state throughout their married lives.
But it is considered a valid marriage.
Yeah. Now that Amy and Brad, if she refused to have children before the wedding, then that's grounds for an annulment in a Catholic church.
Also, didn't mention if they were baptized or not, so
Yeah.
that makes a difference.
Okay, so just to clear up, so Mary and Joseph would have had a natural and valid marriage, but not a sacramental marriage? Or would it be sacramental just because?
Well, Jesus initiated the sacraments,
So
so they would have had a natural, valid marriage.
because they were two Jews getting married.
Right, they're a man and a woman. They're coming together, and they're giving their consent. They were betrothed,
Right.
and they gave their vows to one another. So, for all intents and purposes, yes, it was a valid marriage.
Plus, he accepts her and
Yeah,
takes her
exactly.
into his house. So he agrees to the circumstances
Yeah,
Right.
and
of virginity.
plus they were also open to the possibility of children because they raised God. Yes.
I'm curious, you used the word natural a lot in your talk. I was curious if you could maybe give a short definition.
Right, so when I'm talking about a natural marriage, I'm talking about as it relates to natural law. And again, that's different from what you're going to be observing in nature. Natural law is going to be something that are universal truths to all humankind, and through our reason and intellect, we can find out these truths, although sometimes it may be harder for some people than others. So just because there's the word natural in it does not mean it has to be observed in nature. But natural law, that's the fulfillment of our being.
And you're saying that there are certain universal truths.
Mm-hmm.
is there a way to define what constitutes a universal truth? Because I think at the beginning of your talk you were kind of divorcing, I don't know if I mean, in your words you were saying, I'm going to try to explain this without the church. Now, I don't know if you were intending to divorce
No,
the
not at
Christian
all.
viewpoint from this talk, because I don't really
No,
think
not at
that's
all.
quite possible.
No, and in many aspects it is impossible, but sometimes when you bring forth marriage and you just bring church in the same sentence towards someone, they might get a little hostile towards it and there's going to be barriers go up. But if you can try to entice them by reason and logic, they may be a little more willing to accept and those barriers may go down, and then you can introduce the concepts of the church. That's why I left that gap there for you guys, remember? That's the filler space that you have to figure out how you're going to approach it and what you're going to put in there. Did I answer your question?
I think I'm understanding where you're going with
Okay. Go ahead.
This might be a little off topic, but it's a very much related topic. In terms of homosexual couples being allowed to adopt children or not, how would we answer someone that says something like, well, since Jesus had two fathers and he turned out perfectly fine, so why can't homosexual couples be allowed to adopt children?
Yeah, they're picking and choosing who they want Jesus to be in that case. I mean, Jesus had an earthly father and he had an earthly mother, and then he has a heavenly father. And so to say that
With whom he was equal.
right, with whom he was
Technically, he's
equal.
also his father.
He's not his father. He's a separate person.
Yeah.
But to me, that seems like that person. That's an honest question, and I've seen it come up. People are kind of nitpicking who they want Jesus to be in that case, and they don't have a really good understanding of who the person of Jesus is. He's fully man, fully God, and he has an earthly father, Saint Joseph. He also has a heavenly father who's he's equal to and in constant communion with. So that's going to change things a little bit. If your father is also your heavenly father whom you're equal to, then you're going to turn out really well too. But none of us have that. So.
Gabe, can I jump on that? So if you get asked a question about, homosexual couples adopting children, and why is the church against that? The church is against it, first off, because the natural law is a man and a woman. Set up in Genesis, God set it up that way, that we are supposed to have two parents. But in terms of research of the first generation of children that have grown up with homosexual parents, the results are not good. The sociologists who set out to study it, to gather the data, the children out of those marriages generally have very hard time relating to their opposite gender. They have a much higher rate of depression. They have a high rate of social disorders, of difficulty relating and plugging in. And they're just not happy people. And, anecdotally, there's a lot of young people coming out who are writing and blogging and posting about how hard it was for them to constantly hear as a child, well, you have two mommies, we don't need a man, we just needed a man to make you, you don't need a man either when you grow up. And for the boy with the two fathers, really a lot of psychological damage is done to these kids because people want to have the right to have these children. Just because I want to do something does not make it right. And if I want to do it, because it's what I want, selfishness is never a good basis for making choices. Yes, because they're homosexual couples, they really, they want to have a complete family. And I have male friends, I have female friends, they're going to be in the picture. But they're not the parents. And the evidence to date is not good for these children. They have a very, very hard time now as young adults, the first batch, in large numbers of young adults trying to date, trying to have relationships. They're very unhappy. They're just broken. And it's very unfortunate. And it has driven churches out of the adoption business. In the United States, in Canada, in Great Britain, in most of Europe, of Western Europe. And again, simply because I want to do it, that doesn't mean it's right.
You're also taking away a child's natural right to a
To
mother and a
parents.
father. And not only that, but like I said, these children, if they see that they have two mommies or two daddies, they learn that, well, I have another third parent somewhere. Who are they? I want to know them. There's that innate bond within a child to want to know their parents.
Now we run into the risk of incest. Because they don't know who their father is. And some of these men who have donated so generously in these clinics to create children, we have no idea how many children they have. So it's a pretty... And that's one of the problems that these children have. They're afraid. What if it turns out I am marrying my first cousin or my brother? Or my sister? What? There's fear. And they shouldn't have to live with that fear.
Did that answer your question, Cameron?
So in terms of remarriage, if a couple gets married but not through the church, married through the church, and then or not through the church, and then they get divorced, and one decides to remarry through the church, is it a different process in terms of getting ready for prepping for that marriage than a couple that's never been married before?
Yes, the church will have to look into it. We'll have to look at the nature of what happened, seeing if they were baptized or not, what the reasons for the separation was. That person may have to be granted an annulment first before they can re-enter.
Even if they weren't married through the church initially?
Possibly, yes. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not a canon lawyer.
That's fine, I'm just curious if they have to go through the process.
I have heard of people having to, if they were previously married and it wasn't in the church, and now they're getting married in the church, I've heard of people having to be granted an annulment first.
What's the question specifically?
So if a couple is married, but they're not married through the church, they didn't get married at all through the church, and then they get divorced for whatever reason, and one of them or both decide to get remarried to other people through the church.
Okay.
Is it a different process in marriage prep as,
Yes,
okay,
there is a difference. First off, we recognize marriages of two baptized Christians.
Right.
Okay, they're considered valid. So then, if, I'm going to make it easy, all right, that there are two Catholics who get married civilly, and then they want to remarry, okay. So they have to go through the annulment process, okay, as to whether or not they had a valid marriage when they got married. Was God's grace operating when they got married, or was there something impeding it? That's what annulment means. To nullify.
Second, also we have to take into account were they baptized at all.
Right, so we're going with the premise they're both baptized. I'm just gonna make it easy, yeah. But if they're not baptized, then you get
if
it.
if they were, their original marriage was not through the church at all, it was.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't
Okay,
matter.
it doesn't
Doesn't matter.
The marriage institution per se is a divine institution.
Right.
It's not
Okay.
instituted by man. So even a natural marriage is indissoluble.
Okay.
Right, and then
If it's consummated and,
Yeah.
and
In between two baptized persons.
right, in between two baptized people.
even not baptized person.
If they're two non-Christians,
The marriage per se is a divine institution.
right,
It was instituted by
it's
God.
it comes from God, Genesis.
Right, because of
for
the
everything.
sin, right. But it's not in this. It's not
It's,
indissoluble if it's fully contracted with a full concept.
right, it has
It's
to-
consummated. Yeah.
But if it's all those things are there, okay, so if they've had a valid marriage, then they have to go through the annulment
But
process or
there
remarry
exists
in
the
the Catholic Church.
Palanifetron privilege. If you are not baptized and then you convert to Christianity and your spouse doesn't want to follow you in your faith so that you live in peace and he lives in peace, it could be dissolved. But the marriage per se is never dissolved by the human power because of the Genesis.
Right. And then the thing of marriage preparation is different, is that in the Catholic Church we make a notation, why did that marriage fail? All right, so when they go to apply at a parish and they bring in the annulment, I got my annulment, here's the letter, okay, then the prep is different because part of the prep is going to focus on, let's not do this again.
And if there's children involved, does it make it harder as well?
No.
Or that doesn't?
No, and children are not made illegitimate by an annulment. That
Okay.
doesn't affect their status whatsoever. Yeah, so yeah, that doesn't matter if there's kids or not. Okay? All right.
Good questions, and you can get very complicated answers because
Oh, yeah.
have complicated situations. So.
Life can be messy.
Because it involves people, yeah. Any other questions? Luke?
So I've heard a lot from Christians a lot that say, why should we not just let gay people do what they want? Because it's not a marriage, but it makes them happy, and why should I care? What would you say to that?
Pope Benedict has a really good response to that. He says, in those nations where marriage is extended over to the gay population, he says, it is our duty as Catholics to clearly and strongly oppose that. Again, they're not just wanting to be accepted, but they want to have complete equal rights. They want to have a marriage. And like I said, it's not that we're against gay marriage. It's that, we are, but it's not. It's more like you're asking the wrong questions. It's an impossibility. It's like asking, what's your favorite corner on the circle? It's something that can't happen, but yeah, I understand that they want it to be.
Yeah, and I guess what I mean is like, I've heard from people who know that, and so they're like, why do we care if it's impossible for them to be married? Why not just let them? Because it's nice.
Because they're altering the state of what God instituted. And if we're Christians, we should care.
Okay.
Because we're in a mess now in this country because of this attitude that the Supreme Court has signed on to. And this is a serious mess.
And you can't just alter what is truth. Truth is truth. You can't just say, oh, well, I don't agree with it, I don't like it, I'm going to change it. There's consequences from that. So whether you experience them now or whether we experience them in 40 years or in the next century. So you just can't alter the truth. People don't like hearing that at all. And like I said, my sympathies go out with them, and emotions are involved, which makes it really hard. And I think that's what makes this a really complicated situation, is that so many emotions are involved and invested in this.
Remember, gay people had the right to civil unions in this country, where their rights would be protected. That's what was offered, as a response. Well, you can have a civil union, your rights are protected, inheritance is protected, access to your spouse in a medical crisis, all of the things. You simply cannot have the status of being married. And that's what went to the Supreme Court. They wanted marriage as equal as the marriages of your parents. And that's what this court has declared they now can have.
Remember, the courts don't have the power or the authority to define what is reality.
Look what they did to the Dred Scott decision. A black person was equal to 3/5 of a white person in terms of counting for representation in Congress. Well, just because they said blacks are only equal to 3/5 of whites didn't make it right. And God willing, we will all see this change the way Dred Scott was changed.
Yes.
To backtrack for a moment, how would you answer the accusation that some people might say that these high rates of depression amongst adopted children of homosexual couples might just be the product of some stigma against homosexual couples that the kids are at fault for whatever reason?
That's not what the kids are saying.
Stephanie, what was your answer?
I said that's not what the kids are saying.
Right.
The kids are saying that their problems are because the situation was just untenable. It had nothing to do with anybody else. It had to do with their inner family relations. There's some really interesting, I guess this is what maybe Father was referring to, some interesting YouTube videos of kids that are, the one I just saw recently, she's about 23 years old, and she was talking about it, and she loved her moms. It wasn't that she, had anything
Right.
against them, but it was just a crazy situation, and she felt totally unprepared for the world. So it was an inter-family dynamics thing.
All right.
But you hear that over and over and over again.
Because in public schools, they teach. I just got asked by a parishioner last week, what do I do? My child is being taught in school for her reading book is Lisa Has Two Mommies. That's her reading book in kindergarten. So I don't know that there's a lot of stigma. You can move in circles that are very accepting. Your school is very accepting. You're going to, focus on other families that are going to be accepting. You're not going to be constantly having your life in conflict. But it's what Mrs. Block said, is that it's within. It's not because of pressure from outside. It's within. They're not happy.
Just to mention something, I work for family services, so I see a lot of, I tend to have to interact with a lot of homosexual couples that do adopt children, and I've had firsthand seen children that do have social issues later on when they do start school. Especially if they've stayed home till kindergarten, they don't know any different really, that they have two fathers or two mothers. So then when they do enter school, it's kind of like they're bombarded by a whole other realm, where they feel that everybody else is kind of like the outsider in a way. So it could be flipped both ways, where they can feel like the outlier, or everybody else can be the outlier. But I've seen it firsthand where kids end up with social issues because of it.
Can I answer that question as well? I would respond to that usually, because I've been asked similarly, is you kind of have to break it down to the inherent differences between male and female, and that each one is valuable to the child, that a male has a role to the child to provide, and a female has a role. And usually what I've found is a really good way to relate to people is just ask them, look at your mom and dad and the differences in raising them. And usually it's kind of like the mom was kind of the nurturer, and she was the one who taught you, gracefully, and the father was more of the stern hand and one, who taught you to be more bold and things like that. And just, I talk about my parents, my dad wouldn't always get mad at me for every little thing, but when he did, it was, all hell was let loose. And then with my mom on the other hand, I would usually kind of just brush off when she got mad at me, but she would do it all the time. And you kind of use just kind of those kind of analogies to break it down. But then it also comes to the idea that, especially here on campus, that there's no difference between male and female besides just societal construct. So I'd say you just do your homework on that part as well.
All right.
But is that helpful at all?
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Thank you both.
So I just saw this posted on Tumblr, and they were saying if Christians don't make an uproar about two atheists getting married, then why do they have a right to get angry over two homosexuals getting married, civil marriage?
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really know how to.
Are the two atheists a man and a woman?
Yeah, two heterosexual people that are atheists can get married and have a civil marriage, but.
Right. It's because God instituted marriage. It's a universal truth, and heterosexual couples can participate in that if there's no impediments, they're related to each other or something.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you're a Christian or not, you can have a valid marriage, just because it's divine truth that God gives to many people. for two people of the same sex, you're trying to change reality for that. It's like saying, why can't sound go as fast as light? Because they have two very different natures. You had a comment to that?
Sort of maybe a clarifying question. Can you elaborate then why the natural order reveals to us that natural marriage is a monogamous, procreated relationship between a man and a woman?
The question is why natural law says that?
Yeah.
Gosh, that's a good question. I was hoping someone wasn't going to ask that.
No, can you explain just by looking at men and women?
Right, so there are things in nature that can lead us to those truths. You can see that it takes one man and one woman to create a child. It's not a far-fetched to say that, well, they created them, they should be responsible for bringing up that child as well. And there is an inherent bond within that child to love their father and their mother. And both sexes contribute something unique to the upbringing of that child. So through those observations of nature, it's not a far-fetched conclusion to say that marriage should be between a man and a woman, since this is what raises stable citizens. I'm sure there could be other answers to that. I'm not a natural law philosopher.
And also,
so.
what's your name?
Matt.
Matt, also what Matt had said, about the qualities of the man and the woman are necessary and complementary. And a man, that's the whole thing. Man and woman are complementary. They're fulfilled in one another by one another.
Well, but if there are two men that are attracted and they think they are fulfilling each other,
Yeah, they're not complementary to one another.
why not? They're thinking about it, that they are.
Well, they can think of us like having a square circle.
We feel we are completed.
Well, God bless them.
So
So they're not.
Isn't it that physically, man and woman were literally made to fit together?
the question for us is, do we need divine revelation in order to come to the truth of the marriage or not?
Right, and there's some people, yes.
We are so much confused now.
Right, and some people, yes. I mean, natural law isn't apparent to everyone. Sometimes, it really does take a lot of thought and a lot of reasoning to come to those conclusions. And some people can, some people need some help. It's not that they're dumb.
And why it is the sacrament?
Right, and then it's even elevated to a sacrament.
Yeah, there is a reason for that. Yeah.
Right, because that's the way God intended it to be. So sin had come in and had plagued marriage. And so God came back down and raised it back up to this high standard that's
right,
supposed
and
to be.
sin affected our bodily relations, restored the relation between the spirit and the body. So, it's...
I feel like divorcing it from divine truth is impossible. Because, if you try to take a look at it from, you can see it through nature. Well, we manipulate nature to our benefit all the time. We manipulate it through electricity. We manipulate it with a simple lever with which we can move the entire earth. But it's just, I don't think we can look at it that way without bringing in God's truth to it.
Right. There are ways to delay bringing that in. And I said, that may be more enticing to people. You may draw them in a little bit, especially if they're very hostile towards God. You don't want to talk about God right off the bat because you're just going to offend them. And they're going to bring up these barriers and not listen to you. So you first got to show them, I'm not this incompetent idiot. I can think through things, and I'd like to share my thoughts with you. I would like to have a dialogue with you. And that's oftentimes a great way to start a conversation with someone. And not bring God up right away, but show that, hey, there's some truth and reason to this. So, I'll do Sam first.
Out of curiosity, is the church against, if you were a single person who just was never married, is the church against you adopting a child? Because I don't know why.
I would say yes. I don't really know the answer to that.
Maybe Father knows.
I would imagine yes, because through observing nature, we can. I would argue that a child has a right to a mother and a father, and if you're just single and adopting that child, you're denying that child a right to either a mother or a father.
Okay.
Which is different than if one parent dies. That's just different. And one, something out of your control happened. In another way, you're enabling this. I think it's a different situation. Dr. Block?
I think it's really important to think some of these things through and to sort of sort through the confusion. But take, for example, a married couple where one of the parents just serially, one after another, has relationships over and over again. Would any of us imagine that the child who's the product of that union would somehow manage to be well adjusted at the end of it? I don't even think we think twice about that. We already know that. And it's kind of inherent in that, in what we expect from a relationship. That's natural law.
Right, and that's why we'd also say 2 people, not 12 or 50, because it really does destroy the children. That's going to be a very unstable house. Well, I want to thank you guys for all coming tonight, and bearing through my talk. Let's go ahead and Father can lead us in the closing prayer.